I came home early to surprise my husband and walked into a nightmare I will never forget. His car was in the driveway. So was my sister's. I thought nothing of it. I smiled even. Until I heard water running upstairs, thought the bathroom door was slightly open. Steam filled the hallway. And when I pushed it open, there they were, my husband and my sister in the bathtub. Together, they froze. I didn't scream. I didn't cry. I just stood there while my entire world cracked in half. It wasn't a mistake. It wasn't just once. It had been going on for months. Secret messages. Hidden meetings. Lies told straight to my face. In that moment, I realized something powerful. Betrayal doesn't destroy you. It reveals you. I walked away with my dignity. I chose self-respect over excuses. And losing them? That was the price they paid for underestimating me. There are moments in life that divide everything into before and after. The day I came home early was one of them. It wasn't meant to uncover secrets or expose lies. I had simply finished work ahead of schedule and thought I would surprise my husband with dinner and maybe a quiet evening together. I remember driving home with a strange sense of lightness, as though I had been gifted an unexpected pocket of time. I had no idea that the life I believed in would dissolve before the sun went down. The house looked ordinary when I pulled into the driveway. The curtains were drawn halfway, the same way I had left them that morning. My husband's car was there, which wasn't unusual since he worked remotely some days. What surprised me was my sister's car parked behind his. For a second, I smiled. I assumed she had stopped by for a visit. We were close, at least I thought we were. She had always been spontaneous, the type to show up with coffee and gossip. I didn't question it. When I opened the door, the house felt oddly quiet. Too quiet. There was no music playing, no television murmuring in the background. I called out their names casually, expecting someone to answer. Silence replied. The air felt heavier than usual, like it was holding its breath. I set my bag down slowly and listened. Then I heard it, the faint sound of water splashing upstairs. I climbed the stairs. My footsteps careful but not yet suspicious. I told myself, they must be fixing something in the bathroom or maybe cleaning. Still, something inside me tightened with every step. The bathroom door at the end of the hallway was slightly open. Steam drifted out, curling into the hallway like a ghost. I pushed the door open. Time did not stop. It shattered. There they were. My husband and my sister sitting together in the bathtub, surrounded by clouds of steam and betrayal. They froze. When they saw me, the look on their faces wasn't confusion or innocence. It was shock guilt caught mid-breath. The water rippled around them as though it too had been disturbed by my presence. For a few seconds, no one spoke. I remember staring at them, trying to process what I was seeing. My mind refused to accept it, as if it were an illusion my eyes had created by mistake. I waited for a reasonable explanation to materialize, something logical that would make this scene harmless. None came. My sister clutched the edge of the tub, as though that thin porcelain rim could shield her from the truth. My husband's mouth opened, but no words followed. The silence was louder than any scream I could have made. I didn't yell. I didn't cry. I didn't throw anything. Instead, I felt an eerie calm settle over me. It was the kind of calm that arrives when the worst has already happened and there's nothing left to fear. I stepped back from the doorway, giving them space not out of kindness, but because I refused to collapse in front of them. I walked downstairs slowly, each step deliberate. My heart pounded, but my face felt strangely numb. I sat at the kitchen table, staring at the familiar walls that had once felt safe. My sister sitting in this very kitchen, teasing my husband. My husband smiling at her a little too warmly, the subtle glances I had dismissed. The sudden closeness I had convinced myself was normal, How long had it been happening? I heard their cautious footsteps, their whispers. When they entered the kitchen, they looked smaller somehow, exposed, human. My sister's eyes were red, but I wasn't sure if it was from tears or shame. My husband tried to speak first, offering fragments of apologies that fell apart before they reached me. I held up my hand, stopping him. I didn't want excuses. I didn't want partial confessions, disguised as honesty. What I wanted was the truth, raw and complete. I asked them one simple question: how long? The answer hurt more than the image in the bathtub. It hadn't been a mistake. It hadn't been a single lapse in judgment. It had been months, months of lies layered carefully over my trust. Months of shared secrets between the two people I loved most. There is a particular kind of pain that comes from romantic betrayal, but when it involves family, it multiplies. It infects memories you once cherished. It rewrites your understanding of your own life. I felt as though my past had been stolen from me and replaced with a script I had never agreed to. I looked at my sister and saw not just a woman who had made a terrible choice, but someone who had broken a sacred bond. We had grown up together. We had shared rooms, dreams, secrets whispered in the dark. I had defended her, supported her, trusted her with my deepest vulnerabilities. And she had used that proximity to cross a line that can never truly be UNCROSSED. My husband, on the other hand, had vowed loyalty. He had promised partnership, honesty, and respect. The betrayal was not just physical. It was emotional and deliberate. It required planning. It required deception. It required looking into my eyes and pretending everything was fine. As they tried to explain themselves, I realized something important. Their words were focused on guilt and fear of losing. Me, fear of consequences. But there was no genuine understanding of what they had destroyed. They talked about how it just happened, as if months of secret meetings could be reduced to a spontaneous accident. I stood up from the table and felt the last thread of illusion snap. I understood in that moment that I could not force them to undo what had been done. I could not rewind the afternoon or erase the image burned into my mind. What I could do was decide what happened next. Leaving the house that evening felt surreal. I packed a small bag and went to stay with a friend. The drive was a blur of streetlights and silent tears. When I finally allowed myself to cry, it wasn't just for the marriage. It was for the sisterhood I thought I had, the safety I believed in, the version of myself who trusted so freely. The days that followed were a storm of phone calls and messages. Apologies flooded in. My husband insisted it was a mistake born out of weakness. My sister claimed she had been lonely and confused, but none of their reasons changed the outcome. Betrayal, once chosen, cannot be reframed into something harmless. I began to see things more clearly with distance. There had been signs, subtle shifts in behavior, unexplained absences, private jokes that excluded me. I had ignored them because trust makes you generous. Love makes you assume the best. I learned that sometimes what we call intuition is simply truth waiting for acknowledgement. Healing did not happen overnight. It required confronting anger without letting it consume me. It required grieving not only what was lost, but what never truly existed. I had to rebuild my sense of self independent of the roles of wife and sister. I had to remind myself that their choices were not reflections of my worth. Eventually, decisions were made. Boundaries were drawn. Relationships changed irrevocably. Whether forgiveness came or not was a separate journey, one that could not be rushed or forced. What mattered most was reclaiming my voice and my peace. The image of that bathroom no longer defines me. It is a chapter, not the entire story. It taught me about strength I didn't know I possessed. It showed me that dignity does not require dramatic outbursts. Sometimes the most powerful response to betrayal is composure. Coming home early that day shattered my illusions, but it also stripped away false security. In the ruins, I found clarity. I learned that loyalty is not proven by words, but by consistent actions. I learned that love without respect is fragile. And I learned that even when trust is broken by the people closest to you, your ability to stand up and walk away remains intact. There will always be a before and an after. But the after is not defined solely by pain. It can also be defined by resilience, self-respect, and the courage to begin again. In the weeks after that day, I began to understand that betrayal doesn't end when you walk out the door. It follows you into quiet rooms and sits beside you when you least expect it. I would wake up in the, as if my mind believed there was a version of it where the outcome was different. I stayed with my friend longer than I initially planned. She gave me space without asking too many questions, which was exactly what I needed. The world outside continued as if nothing had happened. In cafes, posted smiling photos online. I moved through days feeling both hyper-aware and disconnected at the same time. My husband kept calling. At first, I ignored him. Then, one evening, I answered. His voice sounded hollow, as though he had rehearsed what he wanted to say but forgotten it the moment I picked up. He apologized again. He said he never meant to hurt me. Weakness spiraled into something he couldn't stop. I listened quietly. The strangest thing was that I didn't feel the urge to scream. Instead, I felt tired. Tired of excuses, tired of hearing about his confusion as though it justified months of deception. There was silence on the other end of the line. For the first time, he didn't argue. My sister's messages were different. Hers were emotional, desperate. She spoke about our childhood, about how much she loved. Me, about how she hated herself for what she had done. Envy had turned into attention, and attention had turned into something reckless. Her words cut in a different way. It was easier to label my husband's betrayal as selfishness, but my sister's betrayal felt like a fracture in my identity. We shared blood, history, inside jokes only we understood. I kept asking myself how. Eventually, I agreed to meet them separately, not to reconcile, not to promise forgiveness, but to look them in the eye and understand the truth without steam, without shock, without chaos. I met my husband first in a quiet cafe. He looked older, as though the weeks had carved lines into his face. He reached for my hand across the table, but I pulled it back gently. That small movement said everything. He said he would do anything to fix it: therapy, counseling, transparency. He offered passwords, phone access, whatever I wanted. I realized then that regret often comes after consequences, not before actions. I asked him a simple question. If I had not come home early, would it have stopped? It requires a foundation that had already crumbled. We sat in a park where we had played as children. She kept repeating that she never meant for it to go that far. I asked her when it started. Then it didn't. I told her something I hadn't said out loud yet. Betrayal doesn't begin with physical touch. It begins with. She nodded, but understanding after the fact does not undo damage. Separation became. Dividing a life is far more complicated than building one. Packing felt like dismantling a version of myself. Through it all, I noticed something unexpected. Beneath the grief, beneath the anger, there was a growing sense of strength. Each decision I made independently reinforced a truth I had forgotten. I am capable on my own. Friends rallied around me. Some were outraged on my behalf. Others simply offered quiet support. I learned that support does not always look loud. Sometimes it looks like someone sitting beside you while you cry without trying to fix anything. There were moments when doubt crept in. I wondered if walking away was too extreme. Society often whispers that marriages should be saved at all cost, that family bonds are sacred no matter what. Would staying teach me about my own worth? Some days I felt empowered, ready to rebuild. Other days, a simple memory, a song we used to love, a restaurant we frequented would send me spiraling. I learned to let those waves come without drowning. One of the most difficult steps was redefining my relationship with my sister. For a while, there was no relationship at all. Silence replaced our daily conversations. Holidays felt incomplete. Family gatherings became tense negotiations of presence and absence. Our parents were heartbroken, caught between daughters. Eventually, we spoke again, not as before, but as two people trying to understand whether anything could be salvaged. Forgiveness, I discovered, is not the same as reconciliation. I could choose not to carry hatred in my heart while still maintaining distance. Boundaries became an act of self-respect, not punishment. As for my marriage, the separation finalized what my heart had already accepted. Signing papers was less. There were no raised voices, no tears, just signatures and quiet acknowledgement that something had ended. Yet endings, I realized, are also beginnings. I moved into a smaller place that felt entirely mine. It was liberating to create a space untouched by shared history. In that apartment I began. I reconnected with friends I had drifted from. There is a certain clarity that comes. After deep betrayal, you become more attentive to red flags, more protective of your energy, but you also become more compassionate toward yourself. I stopped blaming myself for not seeing the signs sooner. Trust is not foolishness, it is generosity. Over time, the image of that afternoon lost its power to wound me instantly. It became a reminder rather than a trigger, but also a reminder that resilience lives quietly within us until it is needed. People sometimes ask whether I would erase that day if I could. The honest answer is complicated. Of course, I wish I had never experienced that pain. My relationship with my sister remains cautious. We are not what we once were, and perhaps we never. It is slower, more deliberate. Trust, once broken, rebuilds in fragile increments. I see it as a daily choice, a choice to respect, to communicate, to remain transparent, even when it is uncomfortable. If I ever choose to love again, it will be with open eyes and clear boundaries. It was an ordinary decision. In the aftermath, I discovered that betrayal can either harden you or refine you. I chose refinement. I chose to let the experience sharpen my understanding rather than dull my capacity to feel. There is strength in walking away quietly. There is dignity in refusing to beg for loyalty. And there is freedom in knowing that even when the people closest to you fail, you still have yourself. By boundaries. And that, more than anything, is the comeback they never expected.